In the words of Billy Joel, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than die with the saints. The sinners are much more fun. Today I feel like addressing a topic concerning the Christian faith that I find amazingly offensive, and thus is among the primary reasons I'm not a Christian. And I'm doing this to close out Season 2 of Noah's Snark podcast because this is something I can talk about off the top of my head. Because, as usual, I'm pressed for time, even though I wanted this season to be a little more philosophical, a little more in-depth with the topics I'm talking about, which hopefully I can do after taking the next few weeks off from the podcast. I have high hopes for Season 3, but we'll see what happens. So let me get into it from there. Today I want to analyze this idea that people need to be saved by accepting Jesus Christ as their Savior because we're all sinners, where the origin of sin and its implications are what I want to focus on. By the way, when it comes to being saved from what exactly isn't very clear because Christians don't have a unified answer as to what happens to us when we die if we haven't accepted Jesus as our Savior. But I digress. Okay, so first of all, what is sin? According to that bastion of brain damage that is the popular evangelical Christian apologist website, gotanswers.org, sin is described in the Bible as disobeying the law of God or rebellion against God. Now, the idea of sin goes back to the very first chapter of the Bible in the book of Genesis, in which Adam and Eve perpetrate what is known as the fall. In the book of Genesis, after God has made the earth and heavens, he decides to make man in the likeness of himself and his peers for no reason that is made even remotely obvious, though on the face of it, it would seem like God did this for vainglorious reasons. On a side note, I'm taking a plain or cold reading of the Bible here because ancient peoples who might have been reading the book of Genesis didn't always have access to priests to explain to them what X, Y, or Z meant, didn't have access to philosophers to explain allegories to them, and they sure didn't have all the rest of the books of the Bible in front of them before it was canonized to put the other books of the Bible into context. Not that that would have mattered much since the resulting book, collectively known as the Bible, is hotly debated in terms of things like its univocality or historical accuracy, even among Christians themselves. Anyway, by this point, a reader of Genesis who is not already primed to believe in God might be confused within the first two chapters since there are two creation accounts in the book. But going off the second account in Genesis 2, after God has created man and placed him in Eden, doesn't think the man he just created should be alone. Think about that for a bit. So God makes animals for Adam so he can have helpers/companions. Since none of the animals turn out to be sufficient at helping Adam or being a companion to Adam, I should point out that I'm reading from the New International Version because all Bibles are obviously the same. Next, God makes a woman for Adam because by intending to give Adam a helper, it's plain that God intended an animal Adam could have sex with. None of the animals were satisfying to that end, it appears. Sorry for my wordiness there, but you get the idea. By now, God has placed them, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden, where they may live, but not without warning. Eat from any tree in the garden, but do not eat from the tree of knowledge. If they do, God warns, they will die. Wait a second, I think he actually gave that edict to Adam and never directly to Eve. Okay, that aside, we all know what happens next. A serpent comes to Eve, telling her one lie and one truth. If Eve eats fruit from the tree of knowledge, not only will she not die, and that's a lie, but she will come to have knowledge of good and evil as the gods do, and that's the truth. She then gives her husband fruit from the tree, and he eats it too. They now know the difference between good and evil, which seems to piss God off the next time he comes around. God punishes Adam and Eve, as if dying weren't going to be enough, and the serpent, who gets off relatively easy by comparison. Not only are Adam and Eve going to die, but God tells Eve she is going to suffer tremendous pain bearing children and subjugates her to her husband, while Adam gets off with having to work hard to grow food from the soil. They are cast out of the Garden of Eden, lest they try to eat from the tree of life and live forever. Apparently, Adam and Eve sinned. They disobeyed God. They transgressed or disobeyed God's law. Or did they? Let's get something straight. It is perfectly clear that Adam and Eve had no knowledge of what was good and what was bad prior to eating the forbidden fruit. God may have told them that eating the fruit from this particular tree would result in their death, but they had absolutely no cause to believe that either death or disobeying God was a bad thing until after they ate the fruit. That said, it is God that explicitly bears the responsibility for creating the circumstances that would cause Adam and Eve to, quote-unquote, fall. Even if God is not the one who caused disobedience to occur, he still made it possible for disobedience to occur by 1, creating a world evil could enter into, 2, creating humans that are capable of disobeying God, and 3, allowing a serpent to roam around Eden that was capable of lying, which, if we take the 10 Commandments into account, force us to wonder why a serpent of all things would be in the Garden of Eden lying. Frankly, there is simply no apologetic answer as to why God created this situation. Yes, we know, dear apologists, God gave people free will so they could choose to obey him freely. But, and this is a really important point, Adam and Eve did not have the tools to make a truly free choice since they were not fully informed about their situation. The first time I sat down to read Genesis with a critical eye, I said, you know what? This is fucked up. What reason did God have for putting the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden? Why put it there if not as a test? He knew that Adam and Eve would fail. Why did he create a serpent that would be so beguiling? And of course, if God had chosen not to know the future regarding this matter, it makes God either irresponsible or a sadist anxiously wringing their hands, waiting to see how things play out. For the believer who wishes to take this story seriously, a suspension of judgment is required to think that God is not evil, or at least an idiot, or would have to know the reason why God set these particular events into motion, would have to know the good reason God did this thing. Because judging by the thousands of years of shitstorms that have followed, it doesn't seem like God unleashed something good upon the universe. As we learn by further reading of the Bible, thanks to Adam and Eve's disobedience, everyone in the future suffers because of what they did. Because of the first man and woman, everyone is now born with a stain upon their soul as punishment for that original transgression. Raised Catholic, I knew this as original sin, which is presumed to be the thing everyone is in need of being saved from. Fuck that. There are several lessons that believers are supposed to take away from this story in its entirety. The first, obviously, is not to disobey God, even if you have no reason to think doing so will be bad for you. However, a child doesn't know the meaning of punishment until they're actually punishment. So it seems odd to me that God would choose to punish his first children so severely. If God's reasoning was to think that it would surely teach humans to never disobey him again, he positively failed on that account. Second, we learn that if a parent does something wrong, their child is responsible for, or at least otherwise stained because of, their parent's crime. What the hell is that about? Is there a logical reason I should be responsible for anything another person does unless I have influenced, coerced, or forced them into an action? Cain and Abel did not cause their parents to screw up. They weren't even around when the fall happened. Yet God chooses to screw everyone over with a generational curse because of the first two people. This lesson imparts that human beings, from their origin, are so flawed as to be virtually garbage and thus in need of saving, even though this is the way God positioned things, setting himself up as a savior. I have to say, getting people to view themselves as garbage is so obviously a tool of control, I'm surprised anyone falls for it. Or maybe they don't. It's a narrative used by people in control to maintain control of other people. The whole idea is very offensive to free thinkers. We also learned that thanks to Eve, women are now answerable to men, though the reason why is not made clear as usual. Maybe it's because she took the first bite and or willingly influenced her husband, though it's never said whether or not Adam knew the fruit was forbidden, just that he ate it. As far as God is concerned, the point is moot anyway. One wonders, if Adam had eaten the fruit first, would men have wound up being the bitches? I just had to ask. Probably the most important moral of the story the believer is supposed to take away is this idea that having knowledge is inherently wrong, being that, knowledgeable people are hard to control. Collectively, no one has taken this lesson more to heart than evangelical Americans. The story of the fall imparts that it is sinful to obtain knowledge. Now, of course, apologists will deny this, except that they can't, as I said, explain why the tree of knowledge is there in the first place. The story never explains why having knowledge of good and evil is bad. I mean, God didn't seem to mind that Adam and Eve were prancing around naked in the garden when if anyone knew it was wrong, God must have. So why was it okay for them to be naked before they knew they were naked? If we recall what the serpent said to Eve, he told her that God didn't want Adam and Eve to eat the fruit because they would become like gods who know good and evil. What was God afraid of? Competition? Equality? We'll never know. The writer of Genesis was a shit storyteller. It seems very clear to me there is only one goal in trying to get people to believe this particular lesson about knowledge, which I mentioned earlier in regards to people as flawed creations. There are things only God and his minions should be allowed to know so that religious leaders aren't questioned about what they pretend to know about God. An ignorant populace allows a leader or leaders, be they spiritual or political, to get away with just about anything. Original sin? Who knows for sure, but the practice of deceiving people for the sake of power is decidedly unoriginal. It is the story of mankind since its evolutionary origins. The whole notion of sin seems to me concocted by some very clever men to make people think they are fundamentally unworthy of their lives to the point that they shouldn't be seeking knowledge. A person who views themselves through that lens is easily manipulated. As for me, not only am I worthy, but I am better than God by virtue of existence. Thanks, Descartes and Anselm. And the only thing I need to be saved from are believers who believe I need to be saved. If you ask me, it is God who should be begging us for forgiveness for his sins. But perhaps he is either too proud or too ashamed, and that's why he's been silent and hidden for all these many long years. God, if you are out there, apologize already. Trust me, it's the least you can do. And that concludes Season 2 of Noah's Snark podcast. I'm Atheist Josephina, aka AJV. You can find me on Blue Sky and on TikTok, where I'll still be making posts. Until I return, remember to revel in reason and love the logical.